Hi there, and thank you for joining me for this presentation for the Liberation75 Student Symposium. In keeping with this year's theme, Navigating Challenging Stories, Exploring the Holocaust and Anti-Semitism in 2024, I'm honored to present a new generation of witnesses. This presentation features the voices of 4 high school students who share their understanding and experiences with anti-Semitism, how learning about the Holocaust has shaped those understandings, and how the recent dramatic rise in anti-Semitism has touched upon their individual lives. My name is Rabbi Margolese, and I'm the president of JTeach.ca. JTeach.ca is an organization that provides learning regarding countering anti-Semitism, Holocaust education, and programs on understanding Judaism. I'm also the principal and director of education of JTeach Academy. This is a registered, inspected private secondary school in Ontario that provides high school credit courses infused with Jewish content. Both of these organizations fall under the umbrella of Jewish Learning Fund, a registered Canadian charitable organization dedicated to furthering education. This presentation is inspired by a quote by Elie Wiesel: "When you listen to a witness, you become a witness." As the years pass, we'll have less and less opportunities to hear testimony from Holocaust survivors in person. There are many different projects that do an excellent job of preserving these testimonies, but the one thing that they're missing is the human connection element. It's up to us and future generations to ensure that the human connection remains alive. It's up to us to listen to the testimonies of witnesses and to become witnesses in their honor. In order to proceed with the presentation, it's very important that we have a common understanding of a definition of the Holocaust and of anti-Semitism. The Holocaust was an unprecedented genocide, total and systematic, perpetrated by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. The aim was the annihilation of the Jewish people. The primary motivation for this was the Nazis' anti-Semitic racist ideology. In 1939, following the invasion of Poland, the Nazis and their collaborators launched the systemic mass murder of the Jews. By 1945, nearly 6 million Jews had been murdered. This is a quote by one of our students who stated, "By learning about the Holocaust and its impacts, we teach generations ahead of us to be courageous and recognize when we have been made targets of people's unjustifiable hate." I think it's appropriate now that we look at a definition of anti-Semitism by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. This definition states anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property or Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Much of modern anti-Semitism is poorly hidden in criticism of the State of Israel. The manifestation of anti-Semitism relies on the desires of members of the public to support these and need to perpetuate the modernized ancient stereotypes and prejudices towards Jews. The claims made are often outright lies or distortions of the truth and are based on biases, hatred, and double standards. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. It is expressed in speech, writing, visual forms, and actions, and employs sinister stereotypes and negative character traits. Contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and in the religious sphere could, taking into account the overall context, include, but are not limited to, calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion, accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust, denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor, or applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. So a quote from one of our students in regards to anti-Semitism, who stated, "If the world was a high school, the Jews would have been the kids they could beat up at lunch. All throughout history, Jews have been targeted. Anti-Semitism will always try to portray itself as some other agenda or ideology." Let's look at 4 different evolutions of anti-Semitism throughout the ages and what they portray. So about anti-Semitism in general, it defies logic. Anti-Semitism often offers contradictory excuses for hatred towards Jews. First, they would have said that Jews were hated because they were rich and because they were poor, because they were capitalists and because they were communists, because they kept to themselves and because they infiltrated everywhere, because they held tenaciously to a superstitious faith, and because they were rootless cosmopolitans who believed in nothing. Anti-Semitism has evolved over time to reflect ideas that seem acceptable to mainstream society. As our values and foci evolve, so too does anti-Semitism in an endless attempt to remain currently tolerated and in fact adoptable to many who did not consider such beliefs before. Looking at the historical evolution of anti-Semitism allows us to recognize how baseless it really is. Ideas that follow logic and reason do not change as they become discredited, they endure. Anti-Semitism endures in spite of logic and reason as a clear demonstration of unjustifiable hate. So let's look at the first of these 4 evolutions. We're talking about Judeophobia. Early Christianity saw Jews as rejecting their Messiah, which led to hostility and persecution. As a matter of fact, early Christian beliefs labeled Jews as the killers of their own Messiah, fostering a deep-seated hatred. Jews were actually painted as complicit in the death of Jesus. A form of literature emerged that was called adversus Judaeos, which meant against the Jews. This literature demonized the Jews as blind, insubordinate, and condemned. Teachings of contempt literature perpetuated, which provided negative stereotypes of Jews as blind and rebellious. Despite the fact that Christianity recognized the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament as the same God, Christianity still defined Judaism as bad and Christianity as good. Christianity's rejection of Judaism laid the groundwork for centuries of discrimination. This era marked the rise of targeted hatred towards Jews, known as Judeophobia or Jew hatred. Judeophobia laid the foundation for targeted persecution and violence against Jewish communities. The second evolution, which can be dated back to roughly 1096, marked a turning point with Jews seen as a demonic force responsible for societal evils. Crusaders massacred Jewish communities on their routes through Europe and the Middle East. Accusations of host desecration, well poisoning, and ritual murder spread fear and violence against Jews, and this period witnessed widespread persecution and destruction of Jewish communities and the expulsion of Jewish people across Europe. In 1391 Spain, synagogues, homes, and Jewish businesses were burned and many Jews were murdered. Hostile treatment of Jews increased until they were expelled from Spain in 1492. This was followed by Martin Luther, a priest who lived in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, encouraging terrible acts against the Jews, and by the invention of the ghetto, and by a series of pogroms which took place over 10 years, killing 100,000 Jewish people. The third evolution of anti-Semitism is racial anti-Semitism. The Enlightenment, which was meant to be a period, an age of reason, actually failed to eradicate prejudice. In fact, it gave rise to racial anti-Semitism in the 19th century. Judeophobia was no longer tolerable since it was religious in nature. It needed to be replaced with science. A new explanation was needed for the old and persisting hatred. Wilhelm Marr, a German journalist, coined the term anti-Semitism, shifting prejudice from religion to ethnicity. Racial anti-Semitism viewed Jews as an alien race, polluting Europe and justifying their elimination. This mutation of hatred was characterized by pseudoscientific theories and the belief in a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world. This mutation marked a deadly turn, culminating in the Holocaust and the genocide of 6 million people.
Okay, so welcome to my vlog on anti-Semitism. So first thing I want to talk about is the history of anti-Semitism. And how it's like progressed over time and how it's changed. So first I'm going to talk about the 19th and 20th centuries. And I think anti-Semitism has genuinely like reached its peak in the 19th and the 20th centuries. With the rise of like a lot of anti-Semitism, and because of the Holocaust where 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazis. And I think that genuinely like pushed a lot of anti-Semitism because it was the world against the Jews, and there was like so much, and it was like everyone against the Jews, and it was extremely hard for them. And like people still know about it to this day. Like it was huge. It killed over 6 million of us. As a lot of people say, it's one Jew was killed 6 million times. And also post World War II, and the Holocaust led to people knowing about anti-Semitism and how dangerous it was to people. And a lot of countries actually after World War II had created laws against that people could not use hate speech and discrimination. However, anti-Semitism genuinely did persist, and a lot of people deny that the Holocaust happens, which I think that is a huge form of anti-Semitism. Personally, I think that, and I think that you know, even though there are these laws in place, anti-Semitism is still consistent and persistent. So overall, while progress has been made, it remains very persistent and a very big issue that requires like lots of education to people and a lot of collective action from everyone to address anti-Semitism effectively. And now I'm going to talk about my knowledge of how the Holocaust has shaped my understanding of anti-Semitism. So I see the Holocaust as something that made the hatred of Jews more globally known. And yes, hating Jews was a thing before this, but this became a worldwide thing. Like people in the world everywhere knew about the Holocaust. This was not something little that happened. This is something that everyone knew about. Learning about it helped me understand that Jewish people have never had an easy way of living, and no matter what, we continue to face hatred constantly throughout our lives. My personal connection to the Holocaust is that when it started in Germany, my great-grandparents were living there and were able to escape to Russia safely. And once they escaped to Russia, they tried to have a stable living situation, but they had much better opportunity to live in Canada, so they immigrated to Canada. And then my great-grandmother became pregnant with, while she was in Russia, she became pregnant with my Zadie, who is the eldest. He's the only son out of he has 7 sisters, so there was 8 of them. And once she became pregnant with him, they fled and immigrated to Canada, where my Zadie was born. And then my great-grandparents had a better way of life here because there was better job opportunity for them, and they were a lot safer than they could have been if they would have perhaps like lived in Germany the whole time. They were raised in an Orthodox Jewish lifestyle in Canada. So my great-grandmother stayed at home, cooked, cleaned, and took care of the kids, whereas my great-grandfather worked to provide for the kids and for his wife and the necessities that they needed. And you know, I always think back to if my great-grandparents would have never left Germany or Russia to come to Canada, there's a chance that they could have never made it out alive, which would have made me not be able to have a life. And I just see that as a connection because there was such a chance that like they could have been killed in the Holocaust. And I just think like learning about it makes me become more aware of what my ancestors had to go through. And this makes me thankful every day, like I said before, that they did come to Canada and have a better life. Because even though they did come here, somewhere that they saw as a safe place for them and their family to live was not always a safe place for them. And it makes me realize that you still have to, unfortunately, face anti-Semitism no matter where you were. And this helps me move on to my next point about the October 7th incident and the terrorism and its influence on my understanding of anti-Semitism. So obviously, like I said, anti-Semitism has been a thing way before this attack, but this attack did cause a huge rise in hateful attacks towards Jews regarding anti-Semitism, not even if they were just in Israel, all around the world. And even though before it did exist, it does show me a perspective of anti-Semitism that I had not seen before. Because even though it had been a thing before, I think now it's a lot more prevalent, and every time I turn around, I see another attack. I can see an attack with people even in my neighborhood, in my country, and it's hard for me because before, even though it did persist, you know, you didn't ongoingly see attacks, but now I feel like you do see them a lot more often. I can also make a connection because I have a close friend who was doing a gap year program in Israel, and she was there on October 2nd and on October 7th, and it's really hard knowing that she was with a bunch of people who she didn't know, and even though she's in Israel where she might have family there, and she was without her parents and she had no clue what was happening. I remember she told me she was on a bus and they started hearing bombs erupting and she was scared to death. She didn't know if she was going to make it out alive. It makes me extremely sick to know that she had to like live through that, and it makes me extremely sick to know that the people in Israel and my Jewish like people, you know, even though we're not related, I feel like every Jewish person is related and we kind of have a connection. And I feel like if I have to see them suffering, it just makes me sick. You know, these acts of terrorism to Jewish people takes away my faith in humanity, and it kind of makes me honestly feel some discomfort towards people who are not Jewish. You know, I think before October 7th, anti-Semitism was a big problem, and now it's just become even bigger. I think it also gave people like that, it gave them a reason to hate on the Jews, and it's their excuse to spew this unnecessary hate. And people like that. And I think this is just terrible. And that's it.
The first step is to understand the roots of anti-Semitism. Stemming from the Enlightenment era to present day, anti-Semitism is absolutely not a new issue. It has a deep history and can come from religious, social, and political factors. From inhumane laws in Europe to conspiracy theories of today, in order to excuse anti-Semitic behavior, anti-Semitism has made its mark in thousands of ways, in thousands of places throughout its existence. Learning about these anti-Semitic incidents and things as heavy as the Holocaust became a big turning point in my perspective of my Jewish identity, my Jewish peers, and the Jewish community that I belong to. These horrors committed against Jewish people during this period is something that our community will never forget, and it will never forgive. It's not just about numbers. It's about individual lives, the individual stories that they held, and the families who were devastated. Some of these families still affected till this day. Growing up, my family's heard stories of relatives who lived during this period and survived to tell their stories, not only in Europe, but in several places around the Middle East. These stories will stay with my family forever, and many other families alike. Even for those who don't have a connection, studying the Holocaust tells us a great deal on what humanity can come to, and to ensure that people know when it is time to do something right. Learning history can save the future. During October 2023, a terrorist group called Hamas acted a violent attack on Israel. It was at the cost of thousands of lives, innocent lives, including women, children, and seniors. This triggered an uprising in numbers representing worldwide anti-Semitic incidents. October served as a reminder that anti-Semitism still lives, and for some, maybe closer to home than imagined, us finding out that even our friends root for what happened that day. From the vandalism of synagogues to verbal and physical harassment on the street, anti-Semitism has yet again proven to have never actually left. The recent attack, no matter how political in nature, should never justify targeting innocent Jewish individuals around the world, especially in their homeland. It is extremely important that political differences are separated from bigotry and violent claims and acts, or else history is bound to repeat itself. There is no place for anti-Semitism on any end of the political spectrum. You would think this is common knowledge. This is why Holocaust education is so important. Now, especially now more than ever, it's important for our community to come together against anti-Semitism and all forms of hate against us. Allies of Jewish communities have to speak out against anti-Semitism in all forms that it may come in. Silence only helps the hatred thrive, although at the end of the day, the Jewish community will always have one another. And this is something we should use. We should be loud and we should be proud for ourselves, because only we can keep our Jewish resilience alive. By learning about the Holocaust and its impacts, we teach generations ahead of us to be courageous and recognize when we have been made targets of people's bigotry. With this, addressing anti-Semitism at the root, like prejudice, propaganda, and extreme ideologies and ignorances, is what we can do to put an end to the fight from the beginning. Learning about the Holocaust helps us build a compassionate and less hateful world for our future generations to live in. Holocaust education is extremely important. It's important to know history, but it's also important to know when history may be repeating itself and how to put an end to it from the beginning. Hate is not something new towards the Jewish community, but how we deal with it now can be very new. Defending our country, our homeland, using an army may threaten people, but it only proves to them that we do have a place in this world. Holocaust education helps us ensure that our future generations know this and know what they have to live for.
Okay, let's take a look at the current evolution of anti-Semitism then. This is a disguised form of anti-Semitism. So today, anti-Zionism often serves as a guise for modern anti-Semitism, denying Jews the right to a homeland. The new anti-Semitism is different. It's no longer directed against Jews as individuals. It's primarily directed against Jews as a nation with their own state and their own land, and it is a mutant form of anti-Zionism. It consists of the following three elements. First, Jews are not entitled to a nation state of their own, a denial, in other words, of the rights of Israel to exist. The irony of this development was succinctly stated by Amos Oz. In the 1930s, he said anti-Semites carried banners saying Jews to Palestine. Now the banners read Jews out of Palestine. He continued, they don't want us to be there. They don't want us to be here. They don't want us to be. This is not yet anti-Semitism, it is anti-Zionism. The second set of beliefs is that the existence of Israel is not merely an aberration, it is responsible for all of the evils of the world, from a lack of peace in the Middle East to avian flu, the destruction of the space shuttle Columbia, the Danish cartoons blaspheming the Prophet Muhammad, the Pope's criticism of Islam, even the 2004 Southeast Asian tsunami. All of these have been called Zionist plots in significant parts of the world. Israel has become the demonic force once attributed to Jews in the worst days of the Christian Middle Ages. Jews and their state are a conspiracy against humanity. The third proposition, the bridge from anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism, is that all Jews are Zionists. Therefore, all Jews are legitimate targets of attack. When the Jewish community center in Argentina is bombed, when synagogues in Paris, Antwerp, Jerba, and Istanbul are attacked, when Jewish cemeteries are desecrated and Jews are physically attacked in the streets, these are not Israeli targets, but Jewish ones. Often the argument is heard that what Jews take as anti-Semitism is in fact no more than criticism of the state of Israel. This view is not supported by any significant authority. Criticism of a state and its policies are part of public life. Often the sharpest criticism of Israel's policies comes from within, from its writers, academics, journalists. That is what makes Israel the free society it is. Israel is not perfect. No nation or government is. Therefore, criticism of it is legitimate. If justified, it should be heeded. If unjustified, it should be argued against. Anti-Semitism is not a normal political debate or the clash of national interests. Now we're going to hear from two more students in regards to these topics.
October 7th, 2023. The day my life has turned upside down. I, like many of my friends, and probably all Jews around the world, will never forget what happened. Seeing initial reports of ground infiltration into Israel at 11 p.m. is a memory I would give everything to forget. The boiling pot of people who have been educated to perceive Jews as aliens, satanic creatures that must be killed, has now busted right open. 1,200 people were killed. 250 people were kidnapped, brutally kidnapped. Such atrocities cannot simply be described as numbers. The history of the Jewish people unfortunately is full of atrocity against us. Anti-Semitism, antisemiyut in Hebrew, is what we are all taught about from a very young age, and don't seem to grasp the reason to why the world, our friends, hates us so much. To explain precisely why that is, I will talk about no other than Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann was a Nazi senior commander, possibly the founder of the Final Solution. Eichmann had in effect been named chief executioner. Thereupon, he organized the identification, assembly, and transportation of Jews from all over occupied Europe to their final destination at Auschwitz and other extermination camps in German-occupied Poland. All throughout his life, he was a Nazi. When he was brought to Israel for justice and was hung, he died a Nazi. Anti-Semitism, even when portrayed as 1,001 different justice movements, is still anti-Semitism. Just like a Nazi will always be a Nazi, so is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is not a modern issue. Anti-Semitism, just like the Jewish people, has existed for thousands of years under different agendas and ideologies. Believe it or not, 3,800 years ago, the Jewish people in the land of Canaan, or Israel, were persecuted because they refused to adopt the religions of foreign regimes that had conquered the land of Israel. Jews in history have always been accused of being aliens, different, evil, and strange. The relations of Jews and Christians have been complicated throughout history. Jesus was a Jew, and Christianity is seen as a new version of Judaism. Some Christians, to this day, still blame Jews for Jesus' crucifixion. During the next 6 centuries after, a new pattern of institutionalized discriminations against Jews emerged. Jews were forbidden to marry Christians, were forbidden from holding positions in government, and were prevented from appearing as witnesses against Christians in court. Just to name a few examples. As Jews were officially excluded by the government, by the law of the land, certain bizarre stories about Jews rose in Northern Europe that connected to the anti-Semitism of the 20th century and now the 21st century. It was alleged that Jews were associated with the devil, had horns and tails, and engaged in ritual murder of Christians. Remember pogroms? This is exactly where they originated from. Going forward in history, and to summarize 2,000 years of persecution and discrimination against the Jews in Europe, Africa, Soviet Union, and almost everywhere in the world. Jews were excluded from society, living separately, having different rights, being pogromed every few years, being called bloodthirsty monsters, witches, money grabbers, controlling the media. The rabbis will control the world, take over societies. Well, if I had a full day to list all the anti-Semitic attacks against the Jews, I'm not even sure I would be able to cover half of them. Point is, if the world was a high school, the Jews would have been the nerds that get beat up at lunch. If you are a communist, the Jews are capitalist. If you're a capitalist, the Jews would have been a communist. If you're a lefty, the Jews are a far-right fanatics. If you're a righty, they're a communist lefty that should never be met. All throughout history, Jews have been targeted. Anti-Semitism will always try to portray itself as some other agenda or ideology. Coming back to reality, 200 years after the worst attack against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism is portraying itself as a resistance against a genocide. A genocide that has increased the population. But as history proves once again, facts are not the strong side of the anti-Semites. The genocidal chant, Min al-Mayya lil-Mayya Palestine Arabiyya, which means that from the water to the water, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be Arab. That chant is being corrected to from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. When they chant Itbah el-Yahud, they don't chant Itbah el-Israeli or Itbah el anything else. They chant massacre the Jew. They're not trying to hide it. History shows that no matter how much you will it will attempt to portray itself as any other objective, anti-Semitism will always be anti-Semitism, just like a Nazi will always be a Nazi. The same people that have said 75 years ago, never again, after my great-grandmother has survived Auschwitz, and 6 million of my people have not, are the same people that have failed to condemn the terrorists that have emptied their 762 chambers on my grandparents' car 30 years ago, and are the same people that now chant for the annihilation of my people without even being aware of it. The good news is that history also shows that the Jewish people have always came on top, never ever surrendered, never ever backed down, never ever gave up. The state of Israel is a living proof of that. 4,000 years later, the same land, same people, same language, who practice the same religion.
Anti-Semitism spikes from the thought of what Jewish people had gone through for simply being Jewish. As I watch documentaries, articles, and family stories, I learn about how valuable our voices are today in history, and the power of the words never again. From babies to elders, Jewish people were put into slavery and murdered. And by 1945, the terrible war had come to an end. As the Allies liberated hundreds of camps, the true horrors of what was happening behind those doors were revealed. Though the end had come, the people were finally free. But at what cost? Over 6 million Jews were dead. But all never the same. Least we forget. 3 simple words that come with great meaning. 3 words that express the value of fighting back. The hatred that must end, and the act that can never be forgiven. My great-grandmother was 4 years old when the war began. She and her neighbor were best friends and would do everything together. Her mother would show them toys and clothes, and they'd come over to people's houses and always hang out. When the news got to the family about how bad the war was starting to become and the severities of it, they made the hard decision and left. That night, they fled with no word. The next day, they found out that their neighbors betrayed them, told the Nazis that there were Jews living next to them. Their house was bombed. My great-grandmother still carries the star, and she showed it to me and told me how she remembers having it sewn on the front and back of her clothes. She was a baby. She was 4 years old. Though she was fortunate and they were able to escape, not all were. My stepdad's grandfather was not. He was in Auschwitz, one of the biggest and worst camps. He used to tell my dad about how every morning when he used the washroom on the old wooden log, he would spit. And if the spit went far enough to like the point that he wanted to, that meant he was going to live another day with strength. No one who lived through these suffers would ever experience life the same again. Least we forget. 3 words. 3 words to think about as I share these stories. Today we are experiencing a war. A war Israel did not want, a war the innocents do not deserve. Today, Jewish people are not safe in their schools, not safe on the streets, not safe in their synagogues, and not safe in their own homes. October 7th changed history forever. Never again. 2 words. 2 words being repeated but not shown. How is it possible to kill a child who's not old enough to know its own religion yet? How is it possible to hear the cries but continue to smile? Least we forget. 3 of the strongest words that Jewish people need to stand by today. I'm unable to go to work wearing my Magen David because I'm scared. I'm a proud Jew, but at what cost? Being proud can take a life. The internet is filled with lies that brainwash people to think that this is Israel's fault. But why? Why do they hate us? Why does anti-Semitism exist? This is a war that cannot end in peace, because forgiveness is no longer an option. This event changed the course of history. Instead of moving forward, we moved further back. The forgiveness given before can no longer be given again. Today, I don't walk home from school. Today, I don't tell people I'm Jewish. And today, I am scared.
We spoke of how anti-Semitism has increased in recent years. And just to support that, I want to show you some figures. These figures come from the B'nai B'rith Canada annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents that was released for 2023 on May 1st, actually, of this year. And we can see the drastic increase in anti-Semitism from 2022 to 2023. Incidents of anti-Semitism in 2023 were recorded as 5,791. These are only the reported incidents, keep in mind, or the ones that were classified as anti-Semitic. There were incidents that would have been reported as mischief, as vandalism, as assault, as bullying in schools that maybe were not specifically reported as anti-Semitism, so they didn't make it into these statistics. What does that figure of 5,791 mean? It means 109.1% increase from 2022 to 2023. The kinds of acts that took place are also significant. Violent acts have increased 208% from 2022 to 2023, from 25 to 77. Incidents of harassment are up 124.4%. There were 2,340 in 2022 and 5,252 reported in 2023. And when we talk about harassment, if we look at online harassment, the increase was 135.7%, from 2,056 incidents in 2022 to 4,847 incidents in 2023. What we see from these statistics is that there definitely is a rise in anti-Semitism, and it affects our student. As our last speaker said, today I don't walk home from school. Today I don't tell people that I'm Jewish. As our last speaker said, today I don't walk home from school. Today I don't tell people that I'm Jewish. Today I am scared. So what can we do? One, don't accept everything you see on social media as truth. Do your own research, examine different sides of issues, and decide for yourself. Don't accept acts of anti-Semitism as no big deal. It is a big deal. Do report anti-Semitism to someone in authority, even if you think that something may be anti-Semitic. Don't risk your safety to counter anti-Semitism. Do counter anti-Semitism through constructive discussion and education when it is safe to do so. I want to tell you a little bit about the Witness Pledge Project. So another do become a witness. Get involved in educating others about the dangers of anti-Semitism and the lessons of the Holocaust through projects like the Witness Pledge. The Witness Pledge is a multi-stage project which began in 2023 and whose goal is to empower students and community members to become advocates and voices for the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. Stage 1 is about signing the pledge. Doing so means that you acknowledge the need to be a witness for the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. Stage 2 will make resources available for educators, community leaders, and young people that allow them to facilitate lessons regarding the Holocaust to students, colleagues, and peers. Stage 3 will feature interactive multimedia exhibits that will be available for loan to educational and community organizations designed to provide immersive learning experience. I want to leave you with one more quote from a student, and that is to say, by learning about the Holocaust and its impacts, we teach generations ahead of us to be courageous and recognize when we have been made targets of people's unjustifiable hate. I want to thank you so much for being here today and participating in this presentation and the important messages that are being conveyed. I hope that you will become a witness and move forward to share the important lessons that our victims, survivors, and students have taught us about the Holocaust. If you don't mind, please take a moment to complete our presentation survey. It'll help us improve future learning opportunities. You can do this by going to bit.ly/JTeachSurvey5784, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have an amazing day. If you have any further questions, you can email me at rabbicorey@jteach.ca JTeach.ca.